Hey everyone, welcome back to PR and Test Drive. Now we've already featured the 2025 Mazda CX-70 PHEV on a first drive video, so today we're going to focus a little bit more on the finer details that you may want to know about this vehicle. This specifically is the CX-70 PHEV GT, and it comes in at about 66,000 Canadian dollars. In terms of lineup, this slots between the smaller CX-50 and the same size CX-90. We're going to go over some of the good things and the bad things about this PHEV CX-70, or whether if we should call it just the CX-85. Let's get started. Starting at the front, the CX-70 is a seriously good looking SUV. It's got a long hood which really makes it feel European. In the center here you get a familiar Mazda grille, and off to the side you get LED headlights that are also steering responsive, meaning that they turn as you steer. Now, down at the bumper here is where you'll find some differences between this and the CX-90, because this gets somewhat of a different design in terms of the front bumper, and in my opinion it looks a little bit more sporty. On the fender here you find your first clue indicating that you have the PHEV version of the CX-70. Alternatively, if you get the gas version, you'll get inline 6 printed on the fender badge here. This GT model features 21-inch rims, which in my opinion looks great and suits well for this car. However, they've got really wide tires, 275 wide all around. In terms of suspension setup, Mazda spared no expense, giving it a double wishbone suspension setup in the front and a multi-link setup in the rear. One notable feature on the side here is how wide these rear door opens, basically 90 degrees, making it extremely convenient to get in and out. Now, over to the rear here, on the other side of the car, you get your charging ports, which features the J1772 plug. Mazda claims that to charge from 20 to 80% on a 120 volt outlet at home will take 6.4 hours, and if you plug it in at a level 2 charger, it will take 1.3 hours to get from 20 to 80%. Alright, we're at the trunk area. Let's talk about the rear end design, because this is one area that I probably don't like that much about the car. I don't really like the bulge above the LED taillights here. Regardless, here in the back is another differentiate point you will find between this and the CX-90, because it gets different rear end bumpers down here. Let's get into the most controversial part of this SUV. Now, given that the CX-70 shares the exact same exterior dimension as the CX-90, but with only 2 rows of seats, it's got a massive trunk. Depending on your use case, not having the third row seats and having more trunk space in place of that third row seats may be a plus. However, in the case of the CX-70, you don't gain much. Now, you do get some under the trunk floor, but I feel like more could be extracted with the removal of the third row seats. Anyway, because the trunk is so big, I also feel like it would be essential to have some sort of cargo divider, perhaps something built in like the Volvo XC40. Regardless, if you want even more cargo space, you can press those 2 buttons down on the side of the trunk to fold down the second row seats. Under the hood, the CX-70 plug-in hybrid uses a 2.5-liter naturally aspirated inline-4 engine paired with an electric motor and a 17.8 kilowatt-hour battery pack. The engine produces on its own 189 horsepower and 192 pound-feet of torque. The electric motor produces 173 horsepower and 199 pound-feet of torque on its own. Combined, the total output is 323 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque, delivered to all 4 wheels through an 8-speed automatic transmission. Mazda, however, has gone with quite a different setup here compared to their other SUVs. First of all, the engine is mounted longitudinally. Second, the motor is sandwiched between the engine and the transmission. And lastly, the 8-speed automatic transmission doesn't use a torque converter. Instead, it uses multiple wet clutch as a system for better efficiency and a more direct feel. In terms of electric-only driving, this CX-70 plug-in hybrid is rated for up to 42 kilometers of range. Inside, this GT trim features Napa leather seats, which in this case is red with black stripe down the middle. I really like how it looks. I also love how these leather feel. The red isn't too bright, which I also like. Additionally, you get a panoramic sunroof as well as a relatively bass-heavy Bose sound system. It sounds overall pretty good, but it's just a little bit bass-heavy, which you may want to tune down in the sound profile settings. The rear seats can be reclined and can be slid forwards and backwards. I'm 5'9", and as you can see, I have plenty of legroom and plenty of headroom. In terms of amenities, you get a rear climate control here, so tri-zone climate control for the car entirely, and you get heated seats for the outer passengers. You also get sunshades, which is nice, and the design here, the hooks are facing towards the cabin, which is much easier to use compared to most other cars where the hooks are faced towards the window. Oh, and lastly, these armrests on the doors here, although they feel a little bit plasticky, they are very soft, so it's very comfortable to lean your arm on. The front seats in the CX-70 is fairly comfortable and quite supportive as well. You get heated and ventilated seats as well as memory seats, which would be great for families that have multiple drivers. The overall cabin design is aesthetically pleasing with a great two-tone color scheme here and a gold color air vent. I also like that there are a whole bunch of physical buttons here. However, there are a couple small quirks with this car. For example, temperature down is a button to press down, but temperature up is also a button to press up adjacent to the temperature down button, which feels a little bit backwards at times. Another thing that might be minute, and really you should know this about your car, is the shift knob. If you want to put it in park, you gotta remember to push it up all the way and then left, otherwise it stays into reverse. Something to remember there, because for sure I've left it in reverse. There is a little warning on the dash here, but it just isn't big enough or isn't loud enough to make sure that I put it into park. In terms of screens, you get a 12-inch digital cluster and a 10.25-inch infotainment screen. For Canadian vehicles, you cannot get the larger 12-inch infotainment screen for the plug-in hybrid vehicles, which means that you also lose the touchscreen capability to your wireless Android Auto and wireless Apple CarPlay. The cluster looks great, but I find that there's not enough customization and it doesn't show enough trip meters for me to track my fuel economy. The infotainment screen works well, shows a lot of information about the car and the battery and the EV powertrain and stuff like that, but not having wireless Apple CarPlay with touch capability really hurts the user experience. Anyway, let's go for a drive. Starting off in pure electric mode, you hear a bunch of mechanical and whirring sounds coming from the transmission tunnel, which I think is pretty cool. The motor itself does have enough power to get you around town, but I wouldn't say that it is zippy. The motor is sandwiched in between the engine and the gearbox, meaning that if you want to accelerate, it needs to change gear. So although in first gear it's quite torquey, you kind of lose that when you reach the higher gears. Additionally, if you want to accelerate while cruising in electric mode, it needs to kick down, so it takes a little bit away from that electric driving feeling. You definitely feel the shifts when it does shift in EV mode, and occasionally it feels a little bit abrupt. I think because of just how much torque, how much instant torque the electric motors provide. If you want the full beans, you can put this into performance or sport mode, meaning that it provides all 323 horsepower. The engine mainly stays on in this mode, and that power is absolutely sufficient for this kind of a vehicle, this size of a vehicle. I don't feel like this is slow by any means. It's not bad at all. The transmission in sport mode is also fairly quick for a car in this segment. The engine sounds definitely doesn't sound as good as the inline-six that you can get in the mild hybrid version of this CX-70 or CX-90, but it has a mix of electric sounds and also exhaust sounds, which makes it feel quite cool. It adds to the cool factor for sure. When you are in normal mode, the engine comes on and off frequently like a hybrid while prioritizing EV power if you have any EV battery left. Generally, the transitions are smooth, but it's when you drive this in a slightly more aggressive tone that it starts to feel a little bit clunky. When it comes to handling, the CX-70 has pretty heavy steering, but I find it quite rewarding because it gives you a decent amount of steering feedback, and given its size and weight, it actually handles pretty well. I would say better than most of its competitors. I do feel, however, that perhaps the front tires are a little bit too wide for a car like this, taking away from its efficiency and a little bit of the nimbleness. Now, in terms of ride quality, I have mixed feelings. On the one hand, it's a little firm, a little sporty, which helps with driving dynamics. But on the other hand, it feels a little bit jumpy at times, especially going over a little bit of a pothole or rougher patches of roads, especially for the rear seat passengers. Perhaps if you go for the smaller rims instead of these 21-inch rims, that would help a little bit, but I feel like Mazda could do a little bit better here in terms of the overall tuning for the suspension. As for efficiency, the CX-70 plug-in hybrid performs very, very well for its size. It's rated for 42 kilometers of electric-only range, which is good for, say, grocery runs or picking up the kids from school and stuff like that. Once the battery runs out, the car reverts itself into a normal hybrid, turning off the engine while coasting and regenerating electricity while braking. On the highway, I was able to manage a very, very respectable 7.6 liters per 100 kilometers after battery depletion and low 7 liters per 100 kilometers in the city after battery depletion, which I find very, very impressive for a car of this size. One thing to note is that there isn't a dedicated charge hold button in this CX-70 plug-in hybrid. Instead, all it has is a charge button, which works great. It allows you to set the battery percentage of how much you want the engine to recharge back into the battery while you're driving. Obviously, your fuel economy will suffer if you put it into that mode, but it doesn't have a battery hold button. Instead, you kind of have to jury-rig the charge button and set the battery level or charge level to something that's slightly lower than your existing battery charge level, so it turns itself effectively into a charge hold button. When it comes to safety tech and driver assistant features, the CX-70 plug-in hybrid comes with adaptive cruise control, blind spot warning, emergency braking, front and rear cross traffic alert, 360 camera, parking sensors, so on and so forth. It also has lane keep assist. However, for some reason, the Canadian-spec CX-70s plug-in hybrids and CX-90 plug-in hybrids do not get lane centering. You cannot option it however much money you want to spend. It just is not available, which I think is a bit of a letdown compared to other competitors of this class. Also, the adaptive cruise control cannot be activated in sport mode for some reason, which I find is a little bit weird. With that said, the rest of the system worked well for me. To sum up, the 2025 Mazda CX-70 plug-in hybrid GT is not perfect. However, it does offer a fairly good overall package. On the good side, it feels premium from the outside and the inside. It handles well, is very efficient for its class, and gives you a whole lot of trunk space. However, on the bad side, It's missing touchscreen for your wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto. It's missing lane centering for Canadian vehicles. And overall, the powertrain and the suspension, I find, just needs a little bit more refinement. What do you guys think? Would you ever consider a CX-70, or would you just pay that $1,000 or so more to get the CX-90 with that extra row of seats? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.